was talking with Warren when I first came in. I thought, well, I'm going to try to tap the brakes tonight and maybe just cover one of these books. Uh, so to kind of spread this remaining material out a little bit long enough for us to get something lined up for what comes next. But as I thought about that when I was at home, I thought, well, we could easily, it'd be nice if we could make this one book. If we could talk about it for the time that we have this evening, I said we could very easily go through the entire Bible. Just depends on the amount of discussion we have around some of the things that we talk about or what we're studying. I have to admit, I have not spent a whole lot of study time looking at some of these books in the Old Testament. And I say that to my shame because there's a lot of good information to be obtained from reading these stories, these accounts. And I think one of the things that impresses me most about the Old Testament and studying of it is the nature of God. We learn a lot about the nature of God through the pages of the Old Testament. And I think it helps me personally. And I think there's a lot of a lot of good information to be obtained by doing that study. I don't think for me I can't do survey type lessons because I think in order to really do a good job at it, you really need to have good knowledge of all the material, and I don't have that depth of knowledge that I would feel comfortable trying to do it and take that approach. So tonight we're just going to kind of dig into the book of Habakkuk and try to learn as much as we can about it. I'm certainly hoping that I can learn some things and gain some more insight into the book. First of all, which kingdom is in play here in the book of Habakkuk? Sorry? Yes. This Habakkuk was his time was centered around the kingdom of Judah, and according to my Bible and the footnotes in it, this happens around 607 BC. And I thought there was some also other good information out of my Bible as well. Starting, it says the Babylonians, and this is just commentaries. So the Babylonians began to rise in power during the reign of, and I will try to pronounce this individual's name, Nabopolassar or Palasar. I'm sure I did a hatchet job on that. Between 626 and 605 BC. And in 612 BC, they destroyed the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, and we've spent some of our time in the past weeks talking about Nineveh and the story. By the time of Jehoiakim, Babylon was the uncontested world power. Nabopolassar's successor, Nebuchadnezzar, came to power in 605 BC and carried out successful military expeditions in the west, advancing into Palestine, Egypt. Nebuchadnezzar's first invasion of Judah occurred in his first year when he deported 10,000 of Jerusalem's leaders to Babylon. The nobles who oppressed and extorted from the poor were the first to be carried away. So I just thought that was kind of gives us a little bit of context, a little bit of backdrop around the book and about the things that are going on. Of course, we know of all the characters or the people in the Old Testament, Nebuchadnezzar is one of those individuals that stands out in my mind because of the stories around Daniel and his reign as king and the way that God dealt with him. But to get us started tonight, I think what we'll do is we'll do what we are in the habit of always doing. We'll just go around the room and let's just read the whole first chapter, and then we can stop and talk about it. So, Ellen, if you would, start us off, read a couple verses, and we'll just move around through the audience until we get the chapter knocked out.
The work on which Habakkuk the prophet saw, how long, O Lord, will I call for help, and thou wilt not hear? I cry out to thee, silence, yet thou dost not save.
Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to seek trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the lawless towers, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore perverse judgment proceeds.
Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs.
They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are also swifter than leopards and more fierce than evening wolves. Their charge ahead, their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat.
They shall come all for violence, their faces shall set up as the east wind, and they shall gather captivity as the sand. And they shall scoff at kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall eat dust and take it.
The wind will sweep through like the wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty, they whose strength is their God. Are you not from everlasting, O my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to correct.
You who are of pure eyes, then to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler.
The Chaldeans bring all of them up with a hook, drag them away with their net, and gather them together in their fishing net. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their fishing net, because through these things their catch is large and their food is plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net and continue on slaying nations without sparing?
Okay. I believe that covers the first chapter. Now, in the material that I was looking at, it's at the top portion of the first chapter. It lists, or I should say, it titles Habakkuk's complaint. Who wants to kind of give me a rundown on what his complaint was, or this conversation that he's having with God?
And he's going to be also punishing the righteous. Why would he do that? And why would he look on wicked?
Well, I think that is true, but I think in the first part of the dialogue, he is mainly pointing out that how long will you sit and observe, let all this happen, and I think that was probably the chiefest thing that he was talking about, and I think. We understand the nature of God, that He is patient, long-suffering. He is given, in every age, I think He is more than, based on, reading the Bible and just reading with the various groups that interacted with God over time. I think God has always been, demonstrated Himself to be a very patient, long-suffering person. But I also know that when the hammer drops, everybody feels the pain. And this is one of those be careful what you wish for kind of things, because we know in terms of the nation of Israel that the entire nation, both the northern and southern kingdom, were taken captive. I mean, they're in that group of people, there had to have been some people that were still faithful to God, but yet they suffered along with the nation, with everybody else. And but God is long-suffering and toward them and toward the nation of Israel, because He just wanted them to repent, to change their minds. And He gave them ample opportunity to do it. And it's interesting, as you read these books, you understand that they would have nothing to do with it. And then I can't help but think about how this parallels with our time. There's, there just seems to be a lot of people want to consider themselves religious, but when it comes down to really understanding what that means and what that entails, there are just not many willing. And that seems to be a common thread through humanity. Of course, we know that it's always God's people were the minority, always, in just about every situation, and through good and bad. So, uh, here we have Habakkuk. He's observing all these things, and he's wondering when God is going to intercede. Now, moving on into their discussion, we have what's considered the Lord's answer. And who wants to give me just a brief rundown of what that answer was?
You were told this was coming, so stand back and be astonished.
Right.
At what's going to happen.
Right.
You're not going to like it.
I'm going to tell you, when, if I'd have been part of this conversation and the creator of the universe just told me that what's about to happen is going to be astonishing and not in a good way, I think that might send chills down my spine to think about it. And the way that the Bible describes the Babylonians, I mean, mighty army, cavalry, just the way it's described, you get the feeling that yes, these are the most powerful army on the face of the earth. Now, throughout the history of man, we know there have been nations rise and fall, and we can think of the Roman Empire. We can think of the Assyrians. There are several nations that that came to power, and God used them. And especially in the case of the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and even the Romans. I mean, you look at Italy now. Italy was once a huge world power, but now they're just kind of I don't want to say they're insignificant because I wouldn't want to insult those people, but they're not what their predecessors were. I can safely say that. They're just not, they're not, a dominant factor in world events. I guess that's what I'm saying. So we see that we see the cycle repeating here and again in Habakkuk's time, where God finally gets enough. They won't. The children of Israel will not change their minds. So God's going to change it for them. And that's, yes, Logan.
Oh, I was just going to make the point, in the first part, one of the part of Habakkuk's complaint was that, he was sitting idly, that God was doing nothing. But I think the interesting thing in the beginning of his response is that he said, I am doing work in your day. So like presently, he has all these things in plan. So he's not just sitting idly by, and, sometimes I think we can try to ascribe, God's motives or what God's doing, and his ways aren't our ways.
Right, and that
he reveals that too.
Yeah, that is so true, and you can't help but think back to the conversation with Job. God is active in the affairs of humankind. Now, he's not. Maybe sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but he is. He is still sovereign. He is still there. Everything moves, ebbs and flows at God's good pleasure. And that's something that we as his people can take comfort in. There's lots of things that, we don't understand, or lots of things I don't understand, why certain things happen. But in the end, we have to trust God's providence, because he absolutely knows far better than humans about how things should run, and just how he is, in this case, how he's getting ready to use the Babylonians. They're going to be a pinnacle power. Yes, Trey.
I think it's interesting that saying how violent and horrible and cruel these people are, and that the laws are powerless against all these. And you're thinking how bad it is, and God's telling them, well, let me tell you how much worse it's going to get. So it's when you think it couldn't get any worse, it can get a whole lot worse, because he's telling them that, these Babylonians that are going to come against you are now they're cruel and nasty.
Right.
So it's going to get worse.
Right. And again, of course, I have the benefit of looking back, but looking back, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, be careful what you wish for. Because, like I said, when God drops the hammer, everybody feels the pain, and there's just no getting around that. So, and I like the way Habakkuk characterizes the Babylonians. How he uses the analogy of the fish in a barrel, and they just reach in there with their hook and take what they want, and then they offer, in terms of worship, they worship the tools that they use, to harvest. In this case, it would be the harm that they do, and I thought that was interesting way to characterize, how they operate. Okay. Anybody got anything additional to chapter 1 that they'd like to bring up?
The description there he gives is pretty terrifying when you look at what is. I mean, it's very descriptive as to like how fast their horses are, how fierce they are, the wolves, and when you just think about that, even now, even though we don't ride horses and stuff anymore, like that's a pretty big thing they're staring down the barrel of.
But the interesting part about that, even now, even in the age that we live in, we understand the imagery that it conjures up in our minds about the cavalry and the foot soldiers and the goings and comings of the battle. Even now, even though now, I think probably the days of tank battles are probably pretty much over. But, the tank has taken the place of the horse and the cavalry. But still, we understand this imagery that God is telling Habakkuk, and of course, in our minds, we understand that these Babylonians, they are unstoppable because God decided that they would be unstoppable. Of course, we know we can look back to times when God was with the children of Israel. It really didn't matter. It did not matter. I always like to hearken back to that story about the angel and the Assyrian army. What was it, like 180,000? It was some huge number. And when we say that the battle belongs to the Lord, it absolutely does. He can dispatch of things like that with ease. But it's just Habakkuk. He has no there's no confusion in his mind about what God has planned. Mallory, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, if it comes to you, please chime in.
I think the end of verse 5 is going to apply to a lot of people today also, that you would not believe though they were told you.
Right.
So how many people that's heard, the gospel over the years who didn't believe it?
That's the truth.
At that time.
Isn't that the truth? The Bible plainly states, in as much detail as God has given us about how that moment, there will not be an opportunity to change your mind on that day. There just won't be time. And it's one of those things that I wrestle with a lot in life, to think about the terribleness of hell. And I don't want to get too much on a tangent here, but to think about the terribleness of hell and that the majority of mankind is going there, that's just way above me. All I know is that I don't want to be in that group, and I want to do everything I can to listen to God. And we're living in our second chance right now, and I know there's a lot of theology out there that would disagree with that and try to, in man's eye, that there's always going to be another chance. Because that's just kind of the way we order ourselves as human beings. We like to give people as many chances as possible in some cases. God's not like that. The God of the Bible's not like that. He paid a horrific price for our salvation, and we're living in that second chance right now. We better take advantage of it if we're wise. Okay, where did we end up with the last reading? Your turn? Okay, let's start in chapter 2, please.
I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets that he may run who reads it.
For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith.
Indeed, because he transgresses by one, he is a proud man. He does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations and heaps up for himself all peoples. Will not all these take up a proverb against him, and a taunting riddle against him, and say, woe to him who increases, what is not his, how long? And to him who loads himself with many pleasures.
Will not your debtor suddenly arise? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, one. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? When they are not witness to oppressive, you will become their booty. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. Because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city, and all who dwell in it.
Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his rest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house. By cutting off many people, you have forfeited your life.
For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people labor to feed the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, and the waters, as the waters cover the sea.
Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink, and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory.
The violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and the devastation of its beasts by which you terrified them, because of human bloodshed and violence done to the land, to the tower and all its inhabitants. What profit is the idol when its maker has carved it, or an image a teacher of falsehood? For its maker trusts in his own handiwork, when he fashions speechless idols.
Woe to him who says people awake, the silent stone arise and shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple, and all the earth keeps silence before him.
Okay, thank you. There was one thing when I was reading this that really stuck out in my mind, uh, I looked for a different. I was having a little bit of trouble with the New King James as I was reading it, so I found a different translation. The new, what is this called? Oh, the New International Version, and it was a little easier to read. But one of the in verse 5 it says, "Indeed, wine betray." Well, it ends with wine betrays it. He says he is arrogant and never at rest because he is greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. I thought, man, that's probably one of the most powerful statements I've read in a while. Greedy like the grave and like death and never satisfied. And isn't that the truth? Isn't that uh, our part of our experience is so true? But but God is basically kind of. But God is telling Habakkuk now, you know, these people, as terrible as they are, they're going to accomplish the work that I want them to do, but they're not getting off the hook. And he starts to describe all the things that are going to befall them at some point when when it suits his good pleasure for those things to happen. And like I said, you know, basically cut them off from the earth because there's no place that we point to today and call Babylon. God just wiped them from the face of the earth, and that's one of the things about the God of heaven. His power, if he wanted to, he could erase the memory of an individual. And really, when you think about it, through the passage of time, that kind of happens. And I don't want to get morbid here, but if you ever walk through a cemetery, you look at those headstones. Nobody knows who those people were. So in some cases, I mean, some cemeteries have people who died 100 years ago, or 120, 150 years ago. There's just nobody around. All you have is the name, but even your memory is gone at some point. And so I guess it's a lesson in and of itself about humility, about all of the things that men and women, but men are really into the monument building business. We build city skylines, and I don't want to get political, but you put your name on a building, but through the passage of time will erase all of that. And so it's humbling that that where our emphasis in life ought to be, not erecting stone monuments to ourselves, but listening to God and doing what He wants us to do, so that we can achieve the true immortality, and that is the immortality of His people. Yeah, Matt.
You occasionally have one of those, a class you had in college or high school or something that just sticks with you. I can remember I had a world civ class in college, and at this point here, I don't remember anything about the class except this one particular thing. And the professor got up there, and this was back in the day of overhead projectors, but the transparency up there, and it was this picture of, it was supposed to be, I forget how far into the future, and basically archaeologists had uncovered this basically modern day America. And there were roads with all these street signs, like McDonald's. You can see McDonald's and make out all these businesses and all that. But it talked about all of their guesses as to what this stuff was, what this stuff meant to our society. And I don't even remember exactly what that was, but the one that stuck with me was they went to this room, and they found these basically skeletal remains that were dressed in all this fine apparel and these fine clothes. And this one lady that was wearing a really fancy dress, they found her skeleton bent over the toilet growing up, and they deduced that this must have been a god, and this is a burial room, and she's bowing down to this god, and all these people are buried. They must have been somebody really important, and that stuck with me with how trivial all of this stuff is. And hundreds of years from now, if people are uncovering this stuff, like, they're going to have totally different interpretations as to what this stuff meant to us. And at the end of it all, it's not, chances are it's going to be wrong, and it's not going to matter. And even us looking back at stuff we find from this time, like, we have assumptions as to what it is, but we don't truly know what it was. And at the end of the day, it don't make any difference. It's all going to be destroyed one day anyway.
That's true. And well, all I can say is I sure hope if this planet is still turning 1,000 years from now, I just hope they don't go out to the farm and start doing archaeological digs, because they're going to be totally confused. Because it's going to be those people must have lived in a junk pile, because that's about all that makes it into those holes that we dig out there to get rid of stuff that we really have no use for, no place for it. So yeah, it's we could talk all night about it, but God is able to raise up a nation, and He is able to put a nation down. Yes, Dan.
So 8, 9, 10 connect Mark what you're finishing with there. Talking about this looting that was done and is going to be returned to you, and so on and so forth. It's hard not to read that and think back all the way to the founding of the nation. The days of Joshua clearing out the land, and they have these decisions to make. And they've been given this instruction by God. They're supposed to fully clear these peoples out and take it fully for their own, not be taking it for plunder, not be intermarrying and all that. We see certain cases where they follow it, and certain cases where they don't. And we're seeing here at the end, those cases where they didn't even now, coming back around again, it's going to be part of their undoing.
Right. That's an excellent point. And it underscores the need to really, really pay careful attention to what God says. Now, God, I'm thankful that in the in the Christian disposition, we're not called to do stuff like that, or God has not instructed us to by sword. Our war is with reason and discussion. That's it. We try to go out and talk to people about the Bible, about the God of the Bible, and their need for Jesus, and need for to take advantage of the sacrifice that He has made. But if those people reject that, we don't drag them out in the street and stone them. We just accept that that's their decision, and we move on. But that is a true point. Yeah.
I don't disagree. Verse 8 specifically, I don't disagree with you, but that's hard to look at with modern sensibilities and then say, that's stuff I wouldn't want to be a part of that. If we look at the way verse 8 is written, because you have looted many nations, all the remainder of the people will loot you because of human bloodshed and violence done to the land, to the town, and all its inhabitants. I think there's a distinction that's being made there between what God was asking for versus, in some cases, these partial jobs we could say that Israel did. That they did part of it, but not all of it, and that was the human element. We're seeing here that this kind of indiscriminate violence that's going to be returned to them. The way I read the verse, it's as though that's what's the human part of this. It's not that Israel and Judah are going to be fully destroyed in these things, but that they're going to suffer greatly because of the way that, in part because of the way they handled themselves early on in their history.
Well, now I just want to clarify. I'm not talking about the destruction of the Jewish people. I'm talking about destruction of the Babylonians, because these things are going to come back around, and all of the way that they did, the shedding of blood, the looting of cities, and the the ungodly way that they lived, that's, they're going to be revisited with those very same things themselves. That was the point I was trying to make. Maybe not in a very good way, but thank you, Dan, for your point on that. But there was one other thing I wanted to look at on this chapter. Oh yeah, back there about the righteous person will live by his faithfulness, and you think about that. We can read over in Romans, the first chapter, and I'll turn over there because I wrote the passage down. Romans 1 and 17, verse 17. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. And actually that is a footnote back to this particular book. But we see that in the mind of God about living by faith, and I guess that's in a roundabout way the point I was trying to make about we put our trust in God and do what He says and listen carefully to what He says, and not worry about the things on this side of eternity. Okay. Yes, Logan.
I was just going to add to that. We've been seeing kind of this theme with Jonah, and some of the other prophets wanting this justice from God, this godly justice. And I think it's interesting that we see the same thing from Habakkuk. This is God's response to that. He's saying the law is paralyzed. And I think really this is kind of God's response that, the law, nobody is justified by the law.
Right.
And that's, and in Galatians 3:11 is another example where this verse was quoted in the New Testament, and is just right along those same lines. It's like, no, you don't want God's judgment, because if God were to put His full judgment on these people, the law can't save. Even the Jews, the law can't save you.
Right.
And so it's a great promise of the things to come in the New Testament. Again, showing God had the wisdom to know that we have now this faith, this Jesus that covers the sin and the faith, and then the law being written on our hearts.
Right.
Which is a whole, completely new thing that now, there is through Christ we can be justified.
Right. And that's, at the end of the day, that is my hope, is to take advantage of that sacrifice and keep myself through prayer in an acceptable state. Because, like we've discussed many times, don't know when that moment will come, but it will be quick. So it behooves us to be in, to take advantage of that and to keep ourselves in a ready state. And I remember a few years back when we were studying about the children of Israel back when they were down in Egypt, and their instructions were to be ready to go. Well, there's a very good parallel with that time and the time that we live in now. Just, we got to keep ourselves ready to go at all times. I guess with the time we have left, we could go through the questions on Habakkuk. Question 1, the book of, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the book of Habakkuk is basically a conversation. Who are involved? Exactly. God and Habakkuk. They're having this discussion. In chapter 1, the prophets asked 2 basic questions. Tell what they were.
You have to endure this violence and all this.
Right. I had that. How long must I call for help? And why do you make me look at the injustice? So Habakkuk was, he was ready for God to act. Okay, question 3. Who did the Lord say would punish the people of Judah? Babylonians, correct. And question 4. How do the just live? And we talked about this a moment ago. Live by faith, absolutely. God does not reveal himself to us in ways that he did for the children of Israel. He doesn't lead us around a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. But we have those things recorded. And all of the things throughout that time up until Jesus went to the cross. So we can read them, study them, and have the kind of faith that we can live by. That yes, we believe in God. We believe that Jesus died on the cross for the sins of mankind, and that he is going to return for his people at some point. We believe those things. Okay. And describe, and I love this question, describe the uselessness of idols.
They don't do anything. They're just decorated stone and wood. They don't do anything.
That's right. The one who makes it just in his own, or who makes it trust, I can't even read my own handwriting, trust in his own creation. Now, isn't that something? I just made a God with my hands, and now this God is going to do things for me? I don't understand the logic in that scenario. Yeah.
I think too, that's why God said you can't make any image, not even of him. Because that's your creation, not him.
Right. Well, and of course we see it in our time now. I mean, there are people that even now they would take exception to it, but it's an idol. If it's carved out of wood or some stone or whatever, it's not God. And you know, it just isn't. It's just a creation of somebody's own hands. And let's see the other one. He makes idols that cannot speak. Those were the two things that I put down. And finally, question 6, Habakkuk may not fully understand why God will do what he will to his people, but in the end, what was the prophet's disposition? And I put it, I will rejoice in the Lord. That was his attitude. And that's, like I said earlier, some of the things I don't understand, doesn't matter. I'm going to trust in God because I trust in his greatness, and I trust in his mercy, I trust in his love. And I'm sure all of us would say the same thing. Well, that's the end of the class. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope that you got something out of the discussion.
What's up, Coach? Singing at home.
Oh, she's a pineapple. Say hi. It's pencil.
Good evening. If you would take out your songbook and mark it to number 767, number 767. We'll use that as our song of encouragement at the appropriate time. After you have that marked, open your songbooks up to number 602. Number 602. Sweet By and By. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. In this way, by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In this way, by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. We shall sing on that beautiful shore the melodious songs of the blessed, and our spirit shall sorrow no more. Not a sigh for the blessing of rest. In this way, by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In this way, by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. To our bountiful Father above, we will offer our tribute of praise for the glorious gift of His love and the blessings that hallowed our days. In this way, by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In this way, by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore.
Keep those songbooks handy. Brief comments tonight before we're singing the invitation song and we're dismissed. I'm taking a great risk by saying this, but I'm sure you all know I'm scheduled to preach this Sunday. So I'm hoping that the fact that I've disclosed that, you'll still be here. But I don't want to get too deep into what I want to talk about because I want to save as much of that for the sermon. But what I want to talk about is change. And you know, as I thought about that, as I was putting this together, of course, there was a lot of things. Chuck and Debbie leaving, it was one of the real driver behind my decision to pick that topic. And I hope I do it justice. But you know, when you think about the gospel and God's message to mankind, ultimately, that's what it all boils down to. God wants us to change. Because the Bible tells us that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, having said that, that means that at one time or another, we were all on the wrong road. And, you know, and God, through the gospel, appeals to us to change. And I want to leave you with this one passage tonight, found over in 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter, the beginning verse 9. The Lord is not slack concerning His promise, as some count slackness, but is longsuffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. And we talked a little bit about that in our class tonight, about where we need to really be. The Bible tells us we need to put up our treasure in heaven because that is permanent. Everything here is temporary. And that passage just told us as much. It told us a couple of things. It told us that God wants us to change our mind about sin. And He wants us to take advantage of what He has done. He has done all the heavy lifting. Jesus went to the cross, was that perfect sacrifice, and now all that's left is changing of our minds. Whether we need to put on Christ in baptism for the first time, or if we've done something that has harmed our relationship with God, we have an opportunity, whether it's in the privacy of our home where we say our prayers, or if it's something that's that a person would need the prayers of the local congregation. We now have this opportunity at the close of our Bible study to consider these things and to consider where our lives are in relation to God's will, and once again confront that question. Is there anything I need to change? Do I need to do something to get myself realigned with God again? Because as that passage, or the second verse of what I read said, because the Lord will come as a thief in the night. And I think we talked about that tonight in our Bible study. There will not be a chance when that moment happens. When that moment happens, where you are is where you are. So it's something to think about. So we're going to sing the invitation song that Brian has selected. If you need to respond to that song in any way, we'd ask you to come now as we stand and sing.
Who at the door is
Standing,
patiently drawing near, entrance within demanding, whose is the voice I hear? Swiftly the tones are falling, open the door for me. If thou would lead my body, I will abide with thee. All through the dark hours dreary, knocking again is he. Jesus, art thou not weary, waiting so long for me? Swiftly the tones are falling, open the door for me. If thou would heed my body, I will abide with thee. Door of my heart I hasten, thee will I open wide. Then we rebuke and thee shall with me abide. Swiftly the tones are falling, open the door for me. If thou would heed my body, I will abide with thee.
Again, we want to take this time to thank those who are visiting with us. Appreciate you being with us. And for your benefit, we'll be meeting again this Sunday at 9 o'clock for Bible study and 10 for worship services. That is right, yeah. The other place I was at, it was at 9:30, so I want to make sure I had that right. We do have a few announcements before we're dismissed. I know Janet's not here because she's not feeling well. She had a fever. So let's continue to pray for her and the things that she's going through. And Cheryl as well. I'm assuming she's still doing pretty well. Matt's got an update.
Jim texted me today, and she's actually doing very well. They thought she was going to be in the rehab facility for a week or better, and they're actually making plans right now to move her into the assisted living apartment that he's living in. So that's progressing better than they had originally thought. Jim, I think, is getting a little tired being away and all that. I think it's wearing on him. So I sent out an email last week that has his phone number if anybody wants to reach out to him with an email or text message of encouragement. I know he would appreciate that. Also, Andrew and Hannah had a meeting they got tied up in and weren't able to make it. Steve got tied up at work tonight, and Ruby was fussy and not feeling well, so Dave's home with her. Amy and Sawyer are leaving tomorrow to go out of town for the weekend and be back on Monday. There's another one I'm missing, but I can't think of what it was.
I'm not sure why I'm up here. I should have let Matt come up there.
Kevin's at work as well.
So we have.
I know there's Kayla's home not feeling well.
Okay.
That's it, but I think I also feel like I'm forgetting something.
Well, I know Mallory's grandmother had a pacemaker made. I'm assuming she's doing well. Haven't heard anything else, so we're glad for that. She was able to go home, so we're good for that. And Cheryl, and let's remember both Cheryl and Jim, because I know he's kind of struggling with that too. People traveling, people sick. So let's not forget to be here Sunday. If nothing else, we'll be dismissed after word prayer.
What it is now. We didn't get all the way through the lesson tonight, but the next lesson, copies are on the back table for anybody that needs to get it, which we'll get, assuming 2 weeks from now is when we'll get there. But the copies are already out there.
Okay. Based off tonight, I assume Mark or whoever will finish up tonight's lesson next week, and then we'll head on to the next lesson, I believe. And I know that I'm going to ask Warren if he would to lead us in closing prayer. The person who was here is not here tonight, so if he would.
Our God, the Most High and Heavenly Father, we're humbled to come before you, thankful for the opportunity we've had this week. Come together and to study your word. We're thankful for those who step forward and step up to teach us through this time. And dear Heavenly Father, as we pray for those we continue to pray for, we think of Cheryl, we think of Janet especially, and Mallory's grandmother. We think of those especially. Remember them in our prayers. As we go through this hour, remember, Lord, that you will always be with us. We ask this prayer in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.